Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and welcome to this week's edition of Understanding Adobe Photoshop. Today, we're going to take a look at an area that most people leave untouched, and that is your user preferences. Photoshop is very customizable, and if you know how to tweak the settings, you can get more performance, get more done, and make the program feel more at home. Let's jump right into the Preferences menu and learn how to tweak things that'll make it more fun to use. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and choose Photoshop Preferences General, or the shortcut is Command or Control K. If you're on a PC, you'll probably need to check the Edit menu to find the Preferences category. Here we go. We've got the Preferences dialog up. Remember, just press Command or Control K and that'll open. Now, we're using Photoshop CS4, so the user interface will be a little bit different if you're using an older version. But with a little hunting and pecking, you'll find exactly what you need. Let's explore. Under General, we're going to use the Adobe Color Picker, which is going to be a standard color picker that's very flexible. We'll also stick with Bicubic, which is great for resizing images. Now, all the default options are currently checked, and all of these work just fine, with the exception that I don't like to use the Shift key to switch tools. So if you uncheck that, it'll be faster when you start to use keyboard shortcuts for your toolbox. These shortcuts will make it easier to switch between tools. Animated zoom is fine, and if you want to zoom in with your scroll wheel mouse, just check Zoom with Scroll Wheel, and you can quickly zoom in and out of the image. We can also choose to use the history log if you need to save what you've done to an individual image. Let's click OK for a second and watch that zoom in action. I can go ahead and zoom right in with the mouse and zoom right back out. If you want to pan around the image, just hold down the Option key and you can actually pan left, right, up, down, etc., which makes it much easier to navigate with your image. So that scroll button mouse can really be a quick way to navigate through a file. Press Command K to open up the Preferences dialog box again. We're going to go to the Interface category now, and this controls how Photoshop looks. You're going to use these standard sorts of things here, like gray for the backgrounds for full screen mode or standard screen mode, and nothing really big here to change. The default modes are pretty good. Do not check Show Channels in Color. This makes it harder to see the details as you start to color correct. It sounds tempting, but leave it alone. Tooltips are great. Tooltips mean that when you roll over something, instead of getting a name written by an engineer, you get a nice, plain description of what that tool or menu item does. So leave that turned on. Everything else here is pretty good, and you can actually specify the language you want. Now, depending upon your country, different versions will be available here. And I'll go ahead and bump the user interface font size up to medium. Now, you can go to large if you want. It's pretty big, but these changes are to make it easier. It's not just that we're all getting older, it's that the monitors are higher resolution. Or at least, that's what I tell myself. But when you bump that size up, next time you quit and relaunch Photoshop, the user interface will be easier to see because text is going to be a little bit larger. No reason to strain your eyes. You need those if you're going to be an imaging professional. Let's go ahead down a little bit. We'll go to File Handling, and here we have some options to choose. I always save an icon and some thumbnails because it makes it easier to find my files. If you're saving for the web, when you choose File, Save for Web, it'll strip that information out to get the file size down. Similarly, I always append my file extensions. This puts the correct three-letter code at the end of the image name and cuts down on errors when you start to move the files from one computer to another. Those file extensions are great, and it really gets to be a pain to try to keep track of them in your head. So just let Photoshop do the work for you. Everything else here is fine. The Camera Raw dialog support works well. We'll go ahead and make sure that everything's set. If you need to later on, you can play with Camera Raw preferences, but I'm just going to leave everything default. Our next category is Performance. And here is where you can assign additional scratch disks. Now, a scratch disk is an actual hard drive that Photoshop uses as virtual memory. If you have several images open or a very large image, Photoshop can really slow down as it runs out of RAM. Your options are to either put more RAM in, which is the best option, but you can also target a hard drive to increase performance. Make sure the hard drive has a fair amount of space. Ideally, you will pick a new second hard drive, and better yet, put that hard drive near the top. You often don't want to use the internal drive as a scratch disk because it can really slow things down. If you've got a good video card, it'll take advantage of the GPU settings and take care of OpenGL drawing. This will just speed things up. If you click Advanced Settings, you'll see that we can get some things like 3D interaction when working with 3D layers in Photoshop, as well as actually see some color correction as we're working. History states are very important. This is the level of undos you have. Photoshop offers multiple undos as long as you have a document open. The default number is 20. If you're just getting started or you like to gamble a bit and take chances, bump that number up to something like 50. But the higher the number, the more memory it's going to eat up. It's not that big of a deal, but make sure you keep that in mind if you're having memory shortage problems. We'll go to our cursors category, and a couple important changes here. Make sure you show the crosshairs for the actual brush here, and that makes it easier as you paint. Similarly, you don't need cute icons when using tools. You want a precise cursor. By using precise cursors, you'll know exactly where you're sampling color from or exactly where you're about to clone. These precise cursors make for precise digital imaging. Get past the cute icons and use the real tools. Go ahead to the next category here, transparency and gamut. Everything's absolutely fine. Next we have rulers, and here's where you determine how your rulers behave. If you work with print, leave it to inches. If you're doing a lot of things for the screen, you might do pixels. If you work in web or video, you're going to change that to pixels, which is more accurate type of measurement because you don't really use inches in those types of application. Beyond that, everything else is pretty much fine for the default settings. Guides, grids, and slices are just colors. By default, it uses cyan. I'm a little bit partial to light red. It's just easier for me to see. This is all about how you want to use these things. Guides are used to help you align things as you drag them around on a canvas. Plugins. Photoshop has third-party support for plugins that add functionality. Where it is right now is absolutely fine. Unless you have a bunch of third-party plugins, you won't need to worry about this. But this allows you to target a drive on a network, like a server, or to target something like a removable thumb drive, so you can take your plugins with you from workstation to workstation. Works just fine. Lastly, we have type, and type is going to control how type behaves in Photoshop. Smart quotes are the true curly Q quotes that you're going to use. A lot of people don't realize that on a computer keyboard, the key right over here that looks like quotation marks isn't quotation marks. It's a straight up and down line for foot and inches. That's because computer keyboards were originally designed for scientific data entry. When you're going to use it for design, turn on that smart quote option so you get true quote marks in your designs as you're working. Additionally, you can go ahead and take advantage of seeing missing glyph protection, which helps out when you're putting things together. It allows font substitution if you're missing something like a specialty character. And go ahead and take advantage of font previews. This makes it easier as you're working. For example, if I select the Type tool and click up here in the font menu, you'll see that we actually get a preview of how all the characters are going to look with a sample for each individual font in our menu. Now, there's a couple more preferences to bang through, and those are all about color management. If you go to Edit, Color Settings, you'll see a few things come up. The default settings are going to be fine for our work here, but if you work in things like multimedia or video, you might turn color management off, or if the printer you're using gives you a specific profile to use for that output device, you're going to use that. We'll explore these settings more in upcoming episodes, but be sure you talk to your service provider when you're getting ready to do jobs where color is critical. For normal inkjet printing on a computer desktop, the default North American general purpose works just fine. Now, I must admit, I'm not working over in China or in Europe. I imagine that you have something similarly named, but probably not the North American general purpose. Use the standard default setting. It will work for most people most of the time. We'll go ahead and click OK. The only other thing worth mentioning is that we can actually customize our keyboard shortcuts and our menus. We're not going to worry about this yet, but as you start to work more and more, you can actually go in and modify the keyboard shortcuts. This is all there so you can get faster. But before we start changing things, let's just work on getting faster with the default settings. As you continue to work and you find you have specialty needs, you can go ahead and tweak those settings so they matter more to you. My name's Rich Harrington. I hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Understanding Adobe Photoshop. We've got more than 150 episodes up on our website, so be sure to visit rastervector.com where you can explore several other techniques. And if you're one of our readers for the new book from Peach Pit Press called Understanding Adobe Photoshop CS4, be sure to download the images from each week's podcast. Thanks again for joining us.